back in July, Denmark's Prince Heinrich made an announcement that he would not be buried next to his wife, the Queen. Now, the reason for the rift in their marriage is actually something that had been going on for 40 years. When his wife, Queen Margrethe, which is not a word that it's a very common name, when she ascended to the throne 45 years ago, he was given a title. And he's not happy about that title. Now, you think 45 years later, you might get over it, but apparently not. So the traditional title for the Danish monarchy in this situation is Prince Cohort, but Prince Heinrich wanted to be king. So, at the time of the announcement, the prince went on record to say what he apparently has been saying to everybody else for the last 45 years. He went publicly on record to say this: "Why should I be only a prince and merely a highness, not a majesty with the status that goes with it?" Right. So the Danish Royal Director of Communications tried to explain this in a way to make it sort of sound better, and in very sort of real ways made it worse, I'm afraid. This is what he says. "For the prince, the decision not to be buried beside the Queen is the natural consequence." Now that's interesting, isn't it? I kind of think the whole thing kind of teeters on that phrase, is the natural consequence of not having been treated equally to his spouse. This is from his perspective, for not having the title and the role that he desired. Now, as good red-blooded Americans, we're like, this is why we revolted against England. This is why we don't like the monarchy. We don't get royalty. We don't get this at all. It's sort of like there's another joke in there, I think. You remember the wedding vow, until death do us part, right? So apparently they're taking that literally. Death, that's it. It was bad, right? It's like a dad joke and a preacher joke all just thrown in there together. Yeah, it's not so good. But before we sort of get too out of hand on those kinds of stories that sort of get under our skin, and we just don't like that, I think that gets at what we have been identifying in this series on our identity as one of our core issues, that we really don't understand who we are. And out of that, we don't know how to walk into the opportunities and challenges of our lives to carry with us the right titles, the right understanding, the right sense of our identity. We all get confused about who we really are and where that identity comes from. We get caught up in wealth and status. We find our importance in trivial things. We act in ways that are contrary to who we really are. And our confusion about our identity, just in the story that I told, does great damage to our own relationships and causes us to waste valuable time in our lives caught up in things that aren't important. Now, we might say it this way: it's not a matter of whether you have a title or not, it's just a matter of whether you have the right title or not. It's not that titles are bad, it's just you got to make sure you've got the right one. And you might think of your own titles. It's probably not highness or majesty or king or prince, but each one of us has some role, some title, some sense of identity that is tied up with what we do in our place in the world. And some of those titles have to do with our work. I'm called preacher a lot, and when people say preacher, I don't know if they mean that as a compliment or not. It's like it's a mixed bag for most of us. But some of our titles are really important to us, like mother or father or sister or brother. Those are important titles. So it's not a matter of whether we have a title or not. It's just a matter of whether we have the right one. And in this series on our true identity, what we've been trying to discover is the right titles, the right names, so that we can understand ourselves and see ourselves as we really are. And the fact that we don't know who we are is the real issue for us in our world. We get caught up in all kinds of things that are trivial or temporary that just don't quite get us there, not fully who we are. And we all have this struggle. Now contrast that with Jesus. Jesus didn't succeed in any of the ways that we normally define success. He didn't have a political title. He didn't have any status to speak of. He didn't climb the ladder of success, but actually defined success as going down the road of service and sacrifice. He didn't get caught up in the power plays that we sometimes do, but found his purpose in giving power away and his greatness in not having any of those titles. His definition of success is helping us understand what real success actually is. And his power play is giving up power. His status symbols, what were Jesus' status symbols? A towel of service, a cross of sacrifice, bread, and juice. And yet, this self-giving love is what makes Jesus so compelling. It's the thing then and now that drew people to Jesus, that draws people to Jesus, because Jesus didn't get caught up in all the things that so many of us so easily do. Jesus was arguably the most influential person on the planet, precisely because he was the most free to be who God had created him to be in the first place. This is what drew people to Jesus then and now. And I think it's what the gospel writer John meant when in his great introduction of Jesus in the beginning of John 1. I think this is what he was referring to in John 1:4. In him was life, and that life was what? The light of all people, of all humankind. Jesus was the light of the world. Jesus was the light of the world. And something in that title gets at what makes us want to find out more about him. But here is what might be the surprise to you. In this series on our true identity, that title not only says something about Jesus, but it also says something about who we are and who we were created to be. It's not just about Jesus, but also ourselves. And that points to the fact that in the New Testament, that title, Light of the World, is used two different ways. It's used, as we've already seen, in response to Jesus, to describe who Jesus is. It's in fact how Jesus described himself. In John 8, we read that description. When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows after me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. But here's the surprise for us. Jesus not only calls himself the light of the world, he also calls us the light of the world. He called us the same thing. He said both. I am the light of the world, and you are the light of the world. How could that be? How could it be both? And that is the surprise for us. It's the reminder and the shock and the truth that Jesus came to reveal our true nature. He came to show us what it looks like just to be human, what it looks like when we are who we were created to be in the first place. He's the natural result of living into our true identity. It's not just Jesus, it's also us. And when we live like we were intended to live, when we know who we really are, we are able to carry with us into the challenges and the opportunities of our lives and our families and our world and our work this light, this distinctiveness, this thing in us that points outside of us and ultimately points to God. Get your head around that. When you are acting out of your true identity, you naturally, effortlessly, and dynamically point to God. And that is what I think Jesus meant when he said to us, you are the light of the world. Well, it's a powerful image. We've lit a candle today sort of to be that visual for us, that we are the light of the world. One of my favorite moments in our life together in the flow of the year is Christmas Eve, when we gather and we read that scripture that Jesus came as the light of the world, and then we each have a candle, and then we go out from this place and symbolically carry that light into the world. It's a powerful image. There's a lot to do with it. And so we don't want to explain it away too much, but I think there's some things that we could say about that light and you and I specifically being the light of the world that are very helpful and very practical. Some things that will help us know how to navigate the places where we struggle, where we have confusion, where there's darkness that creeps into our own hearts and in our own lives and in our families, and where we struggle to know how to be the people of God in the world. I think this identity statement, maybe as much as any, helps us understand how we need to react and respond in a world that has darkness. How do we be the light of the world? How are we actually what Jesus described that we are? Well, thanks for asking. I think there are 3 ways to answer it, and you can put this on the back of your bulletin. There's a place for notes, and I'm just going to say 3 things about what I think it means to be the light of the world. The first is this. I think it means that we extend God's welcome. Just very simply, there is something distinctive about the people of God that helps them extend God's welcome to the world. When Jesus says we are the light of the world, he is saying something about our distinctiveness as God's people. It's helpful here to say maybe that when Jesus said you are the light of the world, he was talking not just to one you, but to a lot of yous, right? Just like kind of I am today. And in English, we don't have a word for that. We don't have a second person plural you. We just say y'all, right? Those of us who are not from Kentucky have learned that language, right? Because we need a word that's like y'all. That's what Jesus said. Y'all are the light of the world. And it does prove that Jesus is Southern. Y'all are the light of the world. And it isn't just one of us, it's all of us. It's the collective result of all of us getting together and God's work in each one of us. It kind of, in one way, takes the pressure off because it's like, oh, how am I going to be the light to the whole world? It's just that you are part of God's people, and God's people have this unique identity. There is something distinctive about us, and it's not that we're holier, not better, or more popular, and certainly not more holier than thou. No, just the opposite. Our contagious nature is in the same compelling things that made Jesus contagious. When we get freed from all the trappings of wealth and success and power. When we let all that other stuff that's trivial get pushed to the side, and when we drill down on our true identity, and when we refuse to believe things that aren't true about ourselves so that we can grab hold of the truth and claim it and live it, that's where we become distinctive. It's not through power, but through service. And it's through a discovery of who we were meant to be all along. And in that way, God's people have always had this role of being God's welcome to everybody else. We get to be sort of a first sign, an indicator of what God wants to do, is sort of we get lit up as we become more fully alive. We become a symbol of God's welcome and life and gift to all people. The church is God's welcome light to a dark world, shining in the darkness. And in that way, it's like we become that, like the famous, tagline from the Motel 6 chain. The church says, we'll leave a light on for you. That's the church's job in so many ways. And that's why invite is the first word in our mission. Invite, grow, and serve. And it's the first word because I think it needs to go first. There's actually a lot to that. In a culture that doesn't know what the church's message is, in a mix of different messages, this is how we lead. This is how Broadway has chosen to lead. We're going to lead with invite. We're going to lead with the light of Christ and the welcome of Jesus, the love and acceptance and grace of God as the start of every conversation. And then everything else goes from there. And there's a reason. I think every person in the world is asking a basic question, am I loved and accepted? And the church says, yes. Yes, before we think, before we talk about anything else, before we get wrestling with our differences, am I accepted? Am I loved? Yes, we've got that. That's what we have. We're the light of the world. We get to say that without having any question or any thought, sort of reactively. A few years ago, I had a little boy in church, and they were visiting. It was actually a friend of ours that had gone to church here, and they moved away, and they have a little boy who's 4. I just met him that morning, and I was asking a rhetorical question in the sermon. And the sermon got to this point where I kind of raised my voice, and I said, is God good? And he said, yes, like without thinking. And then the whole church just sort of it was in the sanctuary, just sort of erupted into applause. All around us, people are asking, am I loved? And we say, yes, without any other conversation. That's what I think it means to be the light of the world. And it's harder than it sounds. It speaks to some of our greatest wrestlings. Yet as God's people, our first task and our main task is to invite people to the God who loves them. No questions. No conversation. just yes. Jesus said that that was his mission, I think, to come to seek and to save the lost. And I shared this some weeks ago. Jim Henson of the Muppets explains that, I think, really well. When Jesus said he came to seek and to save the lost are simply the people that God misses the most. And if you think about who Jesus spent his time with, that statement of his mission matched with his life. That Jesus tended to spend his time with the people that God misses the most, the people that don't know if they're loved or accepted, the people who had been pushed to the edge of society, the people who didn't have much say or much power, the people who wondered if God loved them. And in that, the people that good, upstanding, moral people have trouble loving as well. That's who Jesus spent his time with. I want to share a place in our family life and in my personal life that has been where we have struggled and tried to find a way to be this very thing, to live into our identity as the light of the world. It's a very personal story for me. But I feel like it's kind of a time to share it, and there are a couple reasons that I'll get to. But in our family, about 20 years ago, my brother came out as gay. And fast forward to July of this year, my brother got married. That became legal, and I have never been to a same-sex wedding. This July, my whole family drove to Fort Lauderdale, and we did that. Now, Miami is this kind of crazy place anyway, and so I would love to tell you on one side or the other that we were fine and there was no struggle and no kind of angst doing that, and some of you maybe would feel like there's no big deal with that, and you'd be over here, and I'd love to tell some of you over here who would say, man, that would just be a big struggle for me, and I don't know how I would handle that. And I wasn't here, and I wasn't here. I was just kind of right here in the middle. The best description of the service, my middle brother, who came as well, kind of didn't want to be there, but he came. And I wanted to be as accepting and okay, and there was some struggle in our family. And that's just the way it is. Now, you might be on one side or the other on that issue. As a pastor, I would love to talk to you about it, and there's plenty to talk about. As an older brother, I don't really care on one side or the other. My struggle and my opportunity as we wrestled with this was to be a loving older brother and to represent Jesus into a situation. And that, as I prayed and thought, became our goal. My goal is to represent Christ to my brother and then to a whole community of people that I don't often get to be around. About a week before the wedding, Jenny and I did a song in the wedding, so that was going to be our part. About a week before the wedding, my brother said, oh, by the way, can you pray at the reception? And I said, yes, of course, and then thought about, wonder what that's going to be like. I've never been to the reception of a gay wedding before, and I've never certainly prayed over the meal at that in that setting. What's that going to be like? And began to pray and kind of wrestle with what that might be, and began to see that as an opportunity. And that's kind of the point of why I even bring it up today, because family relationship brought me into the context where I stood before about 50 or 60 people that probably will never, in the foreseeable future, make the trip from Miami and sit up here in our church. And quite honestly, for a lot of other reasons, probably aren't going to anytime soon. And I wondered, what do I need to say and pray in front of those folks that helps them understand that God loves them just as they are? So that was what I tried to do in that moment. That was the opportunity I felt like I was given. And I don't know how well I did at that, but it does get to what I think is the number one question that I hear as people are wrestling with that particular issue, but really any issue. The number one question that people are asking is, am I loved and accepted by God? And when we lead with yes, then that creates all kinds of opportunity for conversation. And we can get to different places and wrestle through things that are hard on any issue. But if we don't lead with yes, if we don't start with God's love and acceptance, then I think it is actually hard to get there. And this particular topic is one that I've wrestled with a lot for not only family reasons, but professional ones, because as a church, the church is wrestling with how to be the church, the light of the world, in particular contexts like this. And the Methodist Church in the next couple of years is going to make some decisions about that. Those basically have to do with whether we will allow same-sex marriages, And the other has to do with whether we would ordain clergy who are self-avowed practicing homosexuals. And all of us, we're all over the map on that. As a Methodist church, we're many places on that. And as I've read and I've been a part of a conference group to work through some of those questions, this is the first thing I've come to, and I don't think it's that far down the road, but it's taken me a while to get there, that if we lead with God's welcome, then there's a place for conversation. If we get into relationships with people in our families or people in our communities who we might not otherwise even know, then this becomes not an issue but a people thing and an opportunity to love people well. But first and foremost, the church's job, I think, is to lead with God's welcome. And that means the church is always on the lookout for people who don't know if they are welcome. That's just what we do. It's part of just sort of a core to who we are. And the heart of that is that we have been welcomed by the light of the world. And so at Broadway, everyone is welcome. At Broadway, everyone is welcome. We don't ask people to change and then come. We say, come, and you'll never be the same. And that's our goal. Okay, well, a little light preaching there. Let's kind of take a deep breath. First point to be the light of the world is that we extend God's welcome. That's what the church leads with. Invite, and then grow, and then serve. The second, I think, is just as important for our time and for our culture, which is that because we are the light of the world, we never fight darkness with more darkness. When the temptation in any time, in any place, and certainly in our time and in our country, is to be motivated by worry or fear or angst, that there is darkness in the world, now maybe as much as ever, it's important for us to remember that we are the light of the world. Yes, there is darkness, and that is precisely why the light is so needed. We are the light of the world, and so it means that we don't hide that light. We don't get caught up in all kinds of things that might diminish it. And that's what I think Jesus meant by not putting under a bowl or hiding under a bushel. What God has done for us is put us up on a hill, and our job is just to let him work in us, to shine. It's funny that Jesus didn't say you must be the light of the world or you should be the light of the world. He just said you are the light of the world. It's an identity thing, primarily not an effort thing. It's just simply an identity thing. Yet when we act out of fear and worry and self-protection, we miss our opportunity. When we believe we must fight hate with more hate, we are hiding our light under a bushel. When we meet the world's ugliness with more ugliness, when we try to strive for peace by making war and perpetuating violence, we miss our opportunity to be the light of the world. The best tool in our arsenal against the darkness is simply the light that has been placed inside of us. Rudolf Stier in Germany, in response to the Nazi crisis there, said this must be your only retaliation. Love and truth for hatred and lies. Because light can do no other. Light cannot be more darkness. It must simply be light. Yes, the world is a dark place, and that's why the light's needed. This is what I think Paul meant when he spoke to the Philippians, a church that he loved, and a church that wasn't in the midst of a lot of turmoil, simply wanting them to see their opportunity. He said, do everything without grumbling or arguing so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. It's an identity statement, isn't it? He's helping them understand who they are in the midst of a bunch of darkness. Then he said, you will shine among them like the stars in the sky. That's you. That's me. That's what we do. We face the darkness of our world with the light of Christ. That's our go-to. That's our best and primary and ultimate defense. Which leads to the final point. We claim God's promise for those without hope. We extend hope to those people who don't have hope. That's what it means to be the light of the world. It's what Ashley and Justin described in going to a place where they simply represent Jesus. St. Francis of Assisi said, all the darkness of the world can't extinguish the light of a single candle. And so that's what we do. We carry that candle into the dark places of the world. And Jesus meant that for all of us. It's important that he said, y'all are the light of the world, because he was speaking not to the politically powerful or those with status or those who had climbed the religious ladder. He was speaking to ordinary people, to fishermen, to prostitutes, to Palestinian peasants, to people like you and me. This is the call up. You are the light of the world. Dallas Willard writes this: the world can no longer be left to mere diplomats, politicians, and business leaders. They have done the best they could, no doubt, so there's no knock on them. But this is an age for spiritual heroes, a time for men and women to be heroic in their faith and in spiritual character and power, to know who they really are, is what I think he means. And the greatest danger is that of pitching the message too low. Pitching the message too low, meaning that we don't know who we are, that we forget, that we walk into the challenges and opportunities of our lives with a diminished understanding of our true identity. You are the light of the world. And through you, God is going to bring hope and restoration, healing and wholeness into the darkest places of our community. This is our true identity. We exist to let God's bright light shine into the world's darkness through us. As we prepare for communion today, I want to tell you one final story that helps us get at our true identity. That little boy in our church several years ago, without questioning, is God good? Yes, sort of yelled it out. That same thing happened to another pastor. He was preaching on what it means to be God's people. And this was a traditional church. He said, look around. And they started pointing to all the stained glass windows in the church. And each one, if you've ever been to one of those churches, has a different person. And he said, look at all these saints that have gone before us. These saints remind us not that they were something special and unique, but that we all are, that we're all God's saints. And what does it mean to be a saint? Again, you don't ask a question you don't want an answer to. And the little boy shot up and he said, I know what they all have in common. They all are people who let God's light shine through. That's us. People who let God's light shine through. And we come to communion today, as we've been doing in this series, to remember that God's light is shining in us. The light of Christ, the same God who created the world and spoke it into existence with the power to create sun and moon and stars, has placed a light inside of us. The same Jesus who crossed the line of eternity to be the light of the world has also reminded us that we are the light of the world. And the same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead is alive in you.